I had a paper reviewed last year or the year before, and one of the reviewer comments was a bit like, anti-people. And so my response to that was, well, people are quite strongly mentioned in this sort of upcoming UN decade on ecosystem restoration, and the SER conference in Brazil in 2017, that was just full of talks about the social side of restoration, about including the needs of Indigenous people. And that was really heartening to see that restoration really is sort of punching through that colonial ceiling. Like, we're naturalists, but the field of environmental science has still kept people out of nature in a way for such a long time, but it's starting to see us as an animal again, which I think is really positive.
Hey, Michael Yadrick here. Welcome to Tree Hugger Podcast, the show where we reimagine ecological restoration. Welcome to the 1-year anniversary show, everyone. Whether this is your first show with us or your 19th or whatever, I embrace you with open arms. For this special episode, I invited Jacob Mills back to the show to reconnect. If you haven't listened to our first conversation from November 2019, it isn't totally necessary to go back and listen, but it was a good one. I'm bringing back an old tradition right now. I want to acknowledge that I am broadcasting from the occupied territory of the Puyallup and Squaxin Island people. This is a small but important way to improve the way I see the people whose ancestors helped to shape the land and waters my ancestors saw when they arrived here just 100 plus years ago. In this way, I hope to strengthen the spiritual bonds that I have with the land, its people, and its meaning. They continue to guide us today if we spend the time to listen. There are lots of reasons to celebrate this week. Jacob and I recorded our conversation a while back. Looking back on it, I kind of forget that he is looking in on the United States as an outsider. At one point, Jacob offered his sympathies about wildfires in the West, the situation with COVID, and the disquiet created by a contentious election. I didn't know exactly how to respond, except to say something to the effect that the 4-year nightmare of the democracy might soon be over. We're not fragile. We persist and endure through the hard times. Honestly, I didn't say it as eloquent as that, but that's what I meant. So, fast forward to today. I am recording this on the weekend after the U.S. election. Not only us in the U.S., but the world is celebrating this news. It's like a pressure relief valve went off this weekend. The democratic process appears to be working despite the allegations of election rigging, threats of litigation, and physical violence that could threaten the electoral process. We can be grateful for so many things right now. Our thanks go out to American heroes like Stacey Abrams for rallying people to vote in record numbers, particularly in states with robust voter suppression. In Squad We Trust, the squad got reelected. 4 progressive women of color congresspeople, Representatives Ilhan Omar of Minnesota, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez of New York, Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, and Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. While we have a long way to go until the transition of power in January, I think Joe Biden is going to make history again. Not only will he be the first vice president of the first black president, he may very well be the first president of the first woman vice president, with South Asian and Black identities. Meanwhile, Nicole Cardoza of Anti-Racism Daily expertly described how whiteness voted for Donald Trump in record numbers too. Not just white people. Whiteness dictates the dominant culture, and that means accepting the black and white reality of limitations of an antiquated two-party political system that gaslights us into thinking we only have 75-year-old or whatever white guys to lead our country. Now, as I try to navigate all this news, I pulled my first card in a tarot reading today. I may have a new relationship with a set of tarot cards. Now, I am not a psychic, but I can imagine I hear a few clicks as people silence the podcast as I talk about this. But I was encouraged very recently to pick up some tarot cards as a way to work on my intuition. I feel like this is a skill set to master as we adapt to a changing climate and a society that manifests multiculturalism and justice. Deep down, the restorationists I know want to tune their instincts and intuitions too. Anyway, my son gravitates towards rocks, stones, and runes, so we frequent our local pagan gift shop, and I walked out with some tarot cards the other day. So this morning, I set my intentions and pulled an upside-down magician from my Smith-Waite tarot card deck. This is the first card in the major arcana. Now, I don't know much about the cards yet. The creators have their description of each of the cards. Right side up, the divinatory meaning of skill, diplomacy, pain, and loss are associated with the magician. However, I pulled it out and laid the magician reversed, like upside down. The Roman numeral 1 and the infinity symbol were facing me. So in reverse, the card could mean illness, disgrace, and disquiet. Now, the literal meaning could freak someone out, and I know enough not to redraw a card. So I sat with it and looked at the symbology and the artwork for a while. Reading about the card and reflecting over it this morning, I think the reading confirms the disquiet I had been feeling the last few days as the outcome of the election looms over us. In navigating through the meaning, I came upon another interpretation of the card that says, if you take care of what you intend to manifest, the universe will shake out the how. I'm good with this. I think we should take time to celebrate, rejuvenate, and then get active in our communities for the work ahead. Closer to home, another thing I'm grateful for is Sean Rowe. While he has supported Tree Hugger Podcast since the beginning, Sean from Resident Restoration last week reached out to Turtle and Annie from the Indian Science Show. They have agreed to join the Eco Restoration Network. I don't even know them, but I am a big fan of their show. I was listening to them late last year and they fell off the podcast matrix. For some obvious and not so obvious reasons, they stopped podcasting for a while, but I think they're back. They are one of my favorite shows, and I encourage you to spend some time with their podcast. They definitely have helped me calibrate my own restoration practice. Turtle and Annie provide some great perspective on connecting to place, being native in a modern world, indigenous science, biocultural restoration, and more. Check out the show description and show notes to find out more about them. I am grateful for you, the listeners. Sometimes I wonder who you are, what you imagine about restoration, and the other topics I cover. Of course, I want to thank my family too, my wife and son especially, for supporting this podcast habit. If you can call it supporting, it can be a tough balance to strike between presence as a spouse and father amidst the podcast and other personal passions. Then there are the guests, the all-star team. Over the past year, I have had some incredible people talk with me either face-to-face or through a screen about their knowledge and passions. I feel a bit smarter because these people are so intelligent and have a lot to offer the world. They care about this complex ecology of planet and people interacting with things like shallow seas, light, forests, birds, and even international relations and our rights. So, for this 1-year anniversary show, I wanted to go back into the Wayback Machine to last year and talk invisible microbes and how they enhance our health, again with Jacob Mills. We were obligated to talk about the small things that are harming us right now, too. Now, if you need a little reminder, Jacob Mills is a PhD researcher at the University of Adelaide. His research focuses on microbiome rewilding. Thinking back to last summer when I committed to making the podcast, I chose Jacob to interview because he was the principal author on the article titled Urban Habitat Restoration Provides a Human Health Benefit Through Microbiome Rewilding, the Microbiome Rewilding Hypothesis. It blew my mind in my conception of restoration ecology. It helped me reimagine restoration. Jacob's research focuses on the use of urban biodiversity to restore the human exposure of microbes to a more native state. This exposure is hypothesized to encourage a state of immune system training and regulation. This is being rapidly and disproportionately lost in urban populations of industrialized countries around the world where non-communicable disease rates have grown out of control. Jacob's broader motivation is to reconnect people to nature by showing them that they are a walking ecosystem whose health is fundamentally tied to the health of the wider environment. Now, Jacob and I have never met in person, though we have talked through the Skype and Zoom screen a couple times now. We did trade fairly regular emails and DMs over the past year, so it was great to have him back on the show, and I'm happy to share this reunion conversation. We pleasantly covered a lot of ground, way more than I expected. During the conversation, Jacob and I dig into how to survive the COVID apocalypse and Jacob's unique quarantine experience, how we are missing out on engaging people about how to improve their immune systems during the pandemic, new opportunities for rewilding greenspaces equitably, how ecological restoration has an obligation to be more culturally restorative. We talk about decolonizing science and restoration. We get an update on Jacob's research to restore native soil microbiota to urban green spaces and schools. We also talk about his new website, blog, and lastly, Imposter Syndrome. Thanks for sticking with the Tree Hugger experiment this past year, you all. It starts right here again. Enjoy my conversation, number 2, with Jacob Mills. All right. Got it.
We're there.
All right. Good morning. What time is it? You all caffeinated?
I'm on the way.
Nice.
It is.
All right.
It's 9:45 in the morning, so I've been up for a while.
Yeah, this is about the time we talked last time. It's been a while. I appreciate you getting on the horn.
No worries. No worries.
I was just looking back. It was like October 19th when we talked last time.
Yeah, I was thinking back and I was like, oh, maybe it was November, but yeah, it was October.
I think the episode dropped in November. It took me a bit of time to do it, to edit out how to publish.
And then 2020 happened. A lot's happened, but,
Oh, yeah.
One global pandemic later, and here we are.
I know. Well, lots of things have happened. I was hoping to kind of just generally catch up with you because Australia had a bunch of fires.
Yeah, we did.
I remember that happened soon thereafter we talked, and I don't know if you've forgotten about that, but then we just had some fires, and we're all together in this coronavirus thing.
Yeah, it's pretty intense for you, I guess, because your coronavirus hit is so massive, and then you've got the fires now on top of that. Well, it's all happening at the same time, and then there's the protests and everything. There's just so much happening in your country right now.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the coronavirus is on top of centuries of racism, and then the acuteness of the fires and the smoke from climate change. It's just a big conflagration of stresses and everything. It's pretty intense.
Yeah, everything's just coming down all at once, isn't it?
Yeah. I don't know.
Some for better, some for worse.
Right. I don't know. Yeah, I guess you get the news, like our coronavirus numbers are pretty high, but our president has it all under control. There's a vaccine coming in a few months, so we're going to be okay. I think we're going to ride it out under his leadership.
Yeah, his sturdy leadership. Yeah, we get that in the news. What an amazing job he's doing.
Our president's buddy. Our president's buddies. Do they hang out? I don't even know.
Oh, I think so. I mean, like our coronavirus has been really well contained, but I think that's more thanks to the states rather than the federal government, because he went on holidays to Hawaii while we're having those massive bushfires, and I saw a satire thing the other day saying Scott Morrison, who's our prime minister, advises Donald Trump to help with the fires that he should take a holiday to Hawaii. They're cut of the same cloth, I would say.
Have you done quarantine during the coronavirus?
We did a little bit.
What does that look like?
So we've had very few cases here, particularly in the state where I am in South Australia. Our health leaders have done an amazing job, and our Premier has done a good job because we're right against we've got a border with the state that's had the worst hit of it. And there's been a lot of bickering and arguing between the states about closing and opening borders and stuff like that, because obviously the economy is driven by a lot of cross-border stuff. But yeah, we've gotten quite well here in South Australia. But I did have to quarantine for 2 weeks when I went to my dad's house, just because I went from the city out to the country. And yeah, we weren't sure at the time with his asthma that we thought he might be in the vulnerable category. I think it turns out asthma's not that bad with coronavirus. But at the time, it was just, so I quarantined in a shed for 2 weeks.
I did. Great. I saw some photos. They look pretty outdoorsy. Look like you're getting back to nature.
Yeah, I'm going back there this afternoon.
Training.
Yeah. I've now actually...
It's not like a short trip for you, is it?
No, it's 5 hours, but I just love living in the shed. It's just a 3-wall shed, and maybe 3/4 of the floor is covered, and then the rest is just a bit of dirt, and then it just opens up to the east. So I'm just laying in bed, and I get all the bird song in the morning. There's beautiful songbirds here, and then the sunrise just comes up to the east and wakes me up in the morning. And so after doing that little quarantine period in that shed, I was like, I'm going to spend a lot more time in this shed. I'm going to actually set this place up. So yeah, I'm heading back there for a 2-week stay. Just coming up, get a bit of writing done. Nice. Surrounded by nature.
It's the life you deserve.
Oh, it's a good life.
Nice. Yeah, seriously. Yeah, I've done a short stint. I don't know. It's been many years in a summer, like in a pop-up tent, in a standalone tent at Audubon Camp. Yeah, that was the best. Probably my circadian rhythms have been in rhythm for...
I know, right? So I did that initial 2-week quarantine in that shed. Then I moved into the homestead, and my mental health just started to decline, even though I was living out in this beautiful place. But I was just spending so much time in the house on my computer doing my work. Whereas before I had my computer set up just facing out, straight out to nature. Mm-hmm. And my circadian rhythm was starting to go out of whack. Like I've never felt happier and healthier than the periods of time when I live in that shed. It's amazing what just being outside all the time, like actually living outside. Because, now we spend 90% of our time indoors, it's just not good for us. Like having that experience where there was a 2-week period where I think I spent 15 minutes inside a building in a 2-week period, and like in a solid building. Obviously I was in that shed for shelter, but it's right opened up, and I'd never felt better. It was amazing. Nature, just living in nature.
Good practice.
Good.
You think you need to put yourself on a schedule? Like you said, like every couple of months, you just need to go out there and just live in the shed?
I do. I've been in Adelaide now for about 6 weeks, and I am just really feeling it, like the pull and the drive to get back out there.
Is this somewhat exaggerated by coronavirus because of like distancing, and like, do you go outside, or it's just from being inside, being in the city?
No. It's I've been living in Adelaide for like the last 8 years. I don't know. It's a city of about, I don't know what it is, 1.3 million or something. And for the last 8 years, because I grew up out in the bush, so being in the city, I would have these periods where I would go for like 2 weeks and then just need to get out and need to go and do something out in nature. So I've always had that drive to get out and go back, especially to Dad's place, to home. It's such a special spiritual place for me. When we were in lockdown back in, a couple months ago, I didn't really notice much difference because I don't go out that much anyway. But so it was kind of like the world flipped from an extrovert's world to an introvert's world, and I was fine. But some of my more extroverted friends were struggling a bit.
And I've seen that too with a few articles about mental health during the coronavirus and during the pandemic and everything. And some doctors were saying, my folks with anxiety, they're just doing excellent. It's like the worst case scenario has just kind of come true. So it's like our minds aren't spinning about the worst case scenario because it's kind of happening for some people. So it's just, you're doing okay, but everyone else again is like maybe anew or for the first time, like facing real mental health crises or some sort of existential dilemmas.
But I mean, I say that it was fine for me, but our lockdown didn't last for too long because we didn't get that many cases. I think if it went much longer, I would have started to go a bit stir crazy, like in the house. Like I still need a bit of socializing.
What's your sign? Are you Virgo?
Yep.
Are you? Yeah, me too. I knew it. Yeah, dude. Do you get those Virgo memes on Instagram? You'll see, like, yeah.
All right.
Okay. Yeah.
You have to send me
I got
some.
you. I know. I understand what you're talking about.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, no one else understands.
No one
except
understands.
for the Virgos out there listening. So passionate, so introverted.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And so
cool.
skeptical of astrology.
I know. I just like sometimes it's so true though. I just have to.
Yeah. Sometimes it hits it.
It's hit on the head. Cool. Well, yeah, and I do recall during our first conversation, because when we were discussing microbiome rewilding, which is, by the way, is still the number one most downloaded episode of the podcast. Yeah,
maybe it's because it's the oldest.
I think it's it's either you or the titling. I think is very compelling. It's like people want to know. Like you did mention how this method, I guess, of training yourself through environmental exposure is very important to alleviating or increasing health span among a variety of things. But I do recall you saying at some point in our interview, talking specifically about viruses. I don't know if you would thinking about this in retrospect, if rewilding ourselves through like training and getting out in nature provides us, I think it does buffer. I don't know. I have this hope that it does buffer us against the coronavirus. But again, I don't know much about it. I'm pretty ignorant, but I have a lot of belief in nature. But I do recall you saying something specific about viruses kind of being exempt to a certain extent from this sort of theory. Do you recall that? Do you remember?
So, yeah, it's interesting with the idea of, being really clean and then perhaps being more susceptible. It's a bit of a paradox where there's the fear of being exposed makes you more susceptible to the exposure that you might have. So I'll try and talk about this with a more, I'll just use a forest as an analogy. So, you have a beautiful, pristine forest and it's really diverse. And then some person who thinks that they want to make a lot of money off the big tall trees in the middle of the forest drives a bulldozer through there. And then suddenly all these weeds start popping up in behind on that bulldozer track where there's been that disturbance and there's access has been created. And then those weeds need to be managed. So that management of the noxious weed that's really strong and taking over and killing the native plants off or suffocating them out or whatever, that's like that management is why we wash our hands. Because if we've got a good, strong, healthy, diverse microbiome, then we should be quite resistant. But we drive bulldozers through our forest of our microbiome every day, whether we're not taking our antibiotics correctly or they're being prescribed when they're not necessarily needed. They're definitely needed sometimes. Or, we're smoking and drinking too much, or we're not getting outside and exercising enough. We're not eating healthy food. We're just eating some really processed crap. That's like driving the bulldozer through our microbial rainforest. And then it makes us more susceptible to these little things that come in, and we haven't got a strong, diverse community to fight it off. But once the nasty pathogen or those nasty weeds are getting around, you do need a management strategy, because there are people in the community that are vulnerable. And so you've then got to start managing it in a way that seems like you'd be making one problem worse. It's sort of, you're using a bulldozer to manage the weed, but you kind of need to get it to a point where that community can then take over the weed again. So, yeah, it's a tricky one. I think, wearing masks and washing our hands for this virus is really important. Just like when you go into a hospital, it's, nothing's sterile, but relative to the outside world, the hospital is sterile relative to the outside world because they clean it so much. And the reason that they do all that cleaning and the doctors have to wash their hands, they got the little pump bottles before you go into every room, so you can wash your hands with the antimicrobial stuff. That's because the hospital is just full of immunocompromised people. And so they need to have these little pump bottles, bulldozers everywhere so that people can continually clean off these pathogens that they might be carrying in that might be harmless to someone with a strong immune system, but to someone with a weakened immune system, they're not. So at the moment, we've got this virus floating around in our public space, and we've got a lot of vulnerable people that need protecting. So we have to use this bulldozer. But yeah, I guess in normal times, I would be hoping for people to increase their microbial diversity. But when one of the members of that community is a real nasty one, then, kind of got to try and clean that out, or else get big outbreaks. And
that is a powerful analogy. I don't know. I put a lot of hope the last few months on the sun, like this vitamin D theory that just like boost my vitamin D. I don't know if I've been eating the best, but I mean, I was definitely out in nature and still trying to get out in the woods. I think it was the best place to kind of be able to distance and still get some exercise and still take in the benefits of the forest, right? So I put a lot of high hopes on the sunshine.
Well,
I don't know if those help. So I think, there's things we could do during this time to build this sort of framework, right, for the good microbiome, but then also as well, like you do need to have these other defenses.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a doctor or an immunologist or anything. I think you're on the right track there, because what troubles me through this time is that we see, the CDC and all the health organization hierarchy, all the way from global down to local level, just telling us to wash our hands and wear our masks, which is, for sure, we need to. The virus is here. We need to stop the spread. So we need to do that stuff. But where's all the information? Like, this is prime time. People are paying attention to health information, what they can do. People are actually reading this stuff with keen interest at the moment. So why is there not information going out there about how to improve our immune systems for the long term and sort of make sure that we would be one of those asymptomatic or low-level symptom kind of people, if we do get it, to be less vulnerable, to be less likely to be in that vulnerable category? Why aren't they flooding us with information at this time where people are really paying attention to that information about healthy diet, about exercise, about sunshine, and all the ways that you can, through lifestyle, improve your immune system and therefore just fight these things off? And then maybe that would help curb the numbers, and not just the numbers of the coronavirus, but all sorts of diseases, non-communicable diseases, and all sorts of things. And who knows, maybe then we're going to save some money on the healthcare system, and then we've got money to spend on other social issues that are very strong and prevalent. Like, there's so much money goes into the healthcare system to be reactionary. You could spend a fraction of that on being preventative and have a healthier society, and probably a more productive and more creative society, and people are feeling good. Everything's functioning well, healthier and happier. It troubles me that this is like prime time for this kind of information to come out while everyone cares, and it's just not happening.
Right. And I think you and your cohorts of folks and friends that have been doing this sort of research and putting out these papers have really emphasized the importance of this, is how these can be a public health strategy.
Yeah.
And be put on the public health agenda. How do you see any infiltration at all, or is there any organizations kind of getting it right? Because you publish in the Restoration Ecology Journal, I think of it like as a restoration intervention, and like principle number 1 of the standards is like engage stakeholders, right? So
it is a restoration intervention, absolutely. Just here in Adelaide, I've had several emails over the last couple of months just coming from people on local councils, or working on the environment department of their local councils, and sort of saying, "Oh, I just came across your work, think it's wonderful. I've been already working on this aspect of biodiversity and in my local council area and for the last 10 years, and trying to do things, but had no idea that it might be having this type of impact." So it's really cool to get that kind of feedback. And I was interviewed for an article, and that article laid out Frankfurt and might have been Dublin and a few European cities that have these actual rewilding programs. And so there's actually quite a large area and just kind of letting it go wild. It's not inspired through my work, but it fits along with it. And it's already been happening because of the environmental benefits. In the cities, we've got all this space and we've got all these people to care for things. That could be an absolute hotspot for conserving threatened species if we make these green spaces into these little conservation spots, because they actually get a lot of attention and they get cared for a lot, these spaces. So, there's those aspects. There's the benefits to the wildlife, but there's also been a lot of work on the benefits to just mental health of just being in nature as opposed to being in a park. And so I think that's one of the angles that these cities are going for as well. But, there's a lot of pushback. A lot of people and communities do want that very colonial look. They feel like it's untidy, and relatively it is, but nature's not tidy. I've never seen really anything too symmetrical in nature except for the bilateral animals and a few crystals here and there. It's just pretty untidy, but that's the beauty of it, I think. They're finding that when they provide some educational materials or have some public engagement, they can educate about the benefits of this untidy, rewilded green space, then people are like, oh, okay. It's that old thing of just being told that something's good and not getting the information, and it's like, it's a bit offensive, isn't it? So like, just be told this is good, and sit down and shut up. So people just need information, and when they've got information, then they can come to their own conclusion a bit more and feel respected. You've got to respect your community, especially when you are changing it up from things that they've been used to for a few generations. It's coming along, and I've been in discussions with urban designers, some landscape architects in the US. We want to do this project about having a functional urban green space that ticks all the societal needs that urban green space has to have. You've got to have certain accessibility and room to play and safety, and there's certain criteria that are already there, but then they want to add this health and microbiome sort of component and a scientific monitoring kind of component, which is really cool. A big challenge for them that they see as the landscape architects is we can make something that's going to be really great for microbial exposure, but a lot of the parents are not going to go anywhere near it because of the fear of microbes that's been built up over the years, because I guess the first microbes that were discovered because they were killing people. So we just thought that they were all bad for a while. It's only the last 10 or 15 years that we've started to realize that there's way more of them out there than we originally thought, and that they're mostly either harmless, neutral to us, or beneficial to us. There's only a small fraction that are pathogens. But again, it's overturning that learning. So like, when you're a kid and you're taught to be super clean, and then you're an adult and you get information that being super clean is not necessarily as good as what you heard. You have that information, but it's hard to make that change, to break out of what you were, really raised to do. So yeah, we got to have, I guess, just some compassion and empathy, and just allow it to take time, because it is going to take time. I think it's going to be like a generational turnover of understanding, because kids don't care about dirt, but we get taught to be scared of dirt.
I think we're always cleaning kids up and picking them up and Band-Aids on things and such. So I can see where this sort of manufactured space that's created by a landscape architect could be sort of a niche thing. But you do, in your most recent paper, it did come out, I picked it out anyway, talking about sort of the exclusivity of some of these spaces and how the challenge is really to make them more ubiquitous, right?
Yeah.
And sort of spread across the landscape so everyone can take advantage of them, not just the white kids, right? Because so many neighborhoods have been disinvested for so long. Starting to see communities that were historically redlined. Have you heard that term before? Yeah, so back in the day, basically post kind of Reconstruction in the United States, really still just white dudes could own property. And successive years over time, it wasn't really until the 1900s where Black people, men, usually Latinos and indigenous people, could start acquiring property, even though our 12th, 13th, 15th Amendment make it appear that everyone should be equal and people can vote or whatnot. There was still, even that's embedded in our Constitution, there was local ways to subvert that. So ways they could do that was local zoning, ordinances, outright discrimination and threats. So, but one way they did it was within the actual federal government. They wouldn't allow people, Black homeowners, even people who had the same jobs as a white person, basically the access to home loans was virtually impossible. And the old school physical distancing before coronavirus has been like segregation of our communities. So you'll see these maps. Yeah, you'll see the racial distancing. Exactly. We see these maps where these places are highlighted in different colors, and there's this ranking system like A, B, C, D, and like A is green, D is red. And so these areas have been marked, and these were areas where home ownership was low for Black homeowners. However, that's where Black people lived and rented. And you can still see that footprint essentially today. And the signature is through just pretty much widespread, disinvestment in a variety of ways, less tree canopy cover, and now they're hotter. So the green is pretty important for a variety of reasons. Yeah. We can map things out, but there's correlations definitely between race and where people live and how green their spaces are. So I think the big challenge is racism is a huge challenge to success in restoration. So if you can eliminate that, like eliminate voter suppression, let's say, in the United States, I think we can make big strides towards restoring our ecosystems.
So something I've been thinking about is, redlined districts tend to be less green and hotter and food deserts and all of that. Something I've been trying to think about and that I haven't got an answer to, because I think it's a tricky one, is when you start to put in these beautiful natural green spaces and a lot more trees, how do you avoid the gentrification and the pushing out then of that community that you're trying to help? I don't know.
That was that question for me. Whoo, that's a big one. I know.
Well, just a discussion point, really, just because I've been thinking about this too.
It's huge. And I think of my own privilege. We're straight up, middle class, and we're content in so many ways. But when we first moved here to this new neighborhood, we looked for places we could afford, balanced by places where there's good schools. Yeah. And obviously places where there, the best scores, that highlight the best schools are in these white communities. So my wife and I we're white, we're socialized white, and we just ended up in this neighborhood, and we thought it was awesome and it was something we could afford, but we're segregated. I've lived in different cities like Washington, D.C., Portland, Oregon, Seattle, and there's historically, red line communities that were historically like the Black central district that have now been totally, almost holistically converted to, and now the composition of them is white. So I think when you look, like Black and brown people don't disappear, but still the barriers of home ownership. I mean, it's still so expensive, and the greener community, and that's how I'm not solving the question.
I didn't expect
the thing, but
it
is like the greener the community is, generally the higher the home values. So it is like in some ways, greening and restoration can be somewhat complicit. I see one project. Well, there's a few projects, but one in particular I've heard talked about is like the restoration of the Los Angeles River in LA. And sorry, I don't have international examples. Like they're like kind of U.S. examples. That's why I talk to you. That's why I talk to you, so you can tell me about Frankfurt.
You picked one with perhaps the most recognizable name, so that's good. That's handy.
Yeah. You can tell me about Frankfurt and Dublin and everything, but the Los Angeles River, it's just like, it's this place where the Los Angeles River ends up flowing into the Pacific Ocean. However, it is concrete. it's like out of its natural channel. It just runs through a big concrete chasm, essentially. And for years, people live along the sides of the river. And, you'll see it in movies. So you'll see it where like there's car chases. That's the Los Angeles
definitely
River.
like
there's car chases in Los Angeles.
Gone in 60
and suddenly
seconds
they just
and Transformers in there and stuff. I think.
Yeah. And so they'll end up in these places. And that's the river. It's not like it's this weird part of this urban dystopia. So there's actually this massive restoration going on. But coming along with that restoration, perhaps people get displaced during that time, during this effort. And then 2, home values will go up. And so people that have traditionally lived there for maybe generations maybe don't belong or don't have a space there anymore. I think we need to look critically at how we may amplify gentrification. We sort of think our work is like politically benign, but it's
definitely not. I mean, thinking about this a lot recently with a few other friends, and we're kind of writing a paper about how the scientific field of restoration ecology has almost a duty to be culturally restorative as well, in a way. And what I mean by that is traditionally some conservation and restoration programs, quite a lot, have been exclusive of people, including indigenous people. And that feeds the colonial history. It feeds the separate from nature paradigm. And it's just not helpful. So I think I would like to see all restoration projects, wherever they are in the world, to be thinking within their scope about the needs of the people in the area, and particularly the indigenous people. We've got this opportunity to not just restore nature, but help to restore something that's going to be good for languages that are being lost and cultures that are being lost, to actually expand that umbrella of restoration to something bigger, because, a lot of language and culture is in and of the environment, implicitly of the environment. It's a much more political game than it seems at the face of it, where it's just like, we've got to put a few trees in here and a few plants there and the birds will be happy. There's a lot more to it than that, because if a place is still exclusive of people, then from a cultural perspective, it's still degraded and not really there. I don't know how it happens, like, to come back around to the gentrification and the pushing out of people, because, the capitalist machine still wants house prices to go up and people to make money, and people want to be able to sell their house and their investment and make some money on it. But, at what point do you put a cap on that and sort of say, we've got to stop pushing people out and we're just doing something to fulfill some greater needs that are beyond the pocket? I had a paper reviewed last year or the year before, and one of the reviewer comments was a bit like, anti-people. And so my response to that was, well, people are quite strongly mentioned in this sort of upcoming UN decade on ecosystem restoration, and the SER conference in Brazil in 2017, that was just full of talks about the social side of restoration, about including the needs of indigenous people. And that was really heartening to see that restoration really is sort of punching through that colonial ceiling. Like, we're naturalists, but the field of environmental science has still kept people out of nature in a way for such a long time. But it's starting to see us as an animal again, which I think is really positive. So it is starting to happen, I think.
I very rarely see these words together, but I think I'm starting to see it more and more. I think maybe I'm just paying attention, but just this concept of, I think where you're getting to is like decolonizing science, decolonizing ecology, or decolonizing restoration. Decolonization, I think, often is referred to as like reparations and like giving land back, but I think more and more it's becoming maybe more ambiguous. Read something recently about decolonizing your microbiome. Basically, that like spending time in nature. Yeah, like spending time in nature, or like eating wild foods, or jumping in a river
Yeah, like eating from an industrial food system is very colonial, isn't it? And it's going to give you a very colonial microbiome. That's a cool concept.
Right, it's a very revolutionary act.
Yeah.
And actually on a cellular level, we are actually kind of reclaiming or restoring ourselves by doing these things that are kind of acts of resistance. I think what you're getting to too, I don't know if you've seen it, and I haven't used it, but in the new standards, 2nd edition from the Society for Ecological Restoration, there's a social benefits wheel.
I haven't seen it.
It's very I kind of like it, but it's very white of me to metrics, and we're starting
I do like the SER is really starting to drive the social aspect of restoration.
Right. When we talk about species composition or structural diversity or ecosystem function, external exchanges, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. This social benefits wheel, even though it is separate and not integrated in the ecological recovery wheel, there's a social benefits wheel, which is weird. Maybe they should be integrated, but in the social benefits wheel, it includes sort of metrics or at least buckets for sustainable economies, community well-being, stakeholder engagement, benefits distribution, knowledge enrichment, and restoring natural capital. So it is more holistic.
Yeah, that's a good move. What I really want to see is where we talk about functional ecology and the ins and the outs, all the variables that you listed before, is I want to actually see traditional ecological practice as one of the functional components, because like in Australia, fire stick farming or whatever, it's landscape management. It's this bipedal, very complex animal walking around having a very strong impact on the land, yet that's just totally scooped out and ignored from the ecological studies. And why? We are such an important part of the landscape. We are part of the species composition.
That's right. Yeah, and I think when you mentioned rewilding, on the macro type of rewilding and setting big tracts of land together, I think one of the biggest critiques of that, and it's one of those things, there's a critique of restoration ecology that we're just backwards thinking, of us looking at historical references. But I think even with rewilding, again, the outside critique is that it excludes people. But I don't necessarily know, not having my boots on the ground and not being super familiar with some of these initiatives, I don't know how much it does include people in the matrix. If we're thinking about the science fiction type of rewilding, I'm thinking about with we bring giant ground sloths back and sort of thing, and saber-toothed tigers. I don't know if I really want to be walking around, but integrating humans into that because of the health benefits. And we have been a fixture in nature for, millions of years at least.
I think rewilding our urban centers where we actually reside, we can maybe keep the big cats out of there. I don't know. Maybe that's not a good idea to, bring wolves back to Seattle. But
people freak out with coyotes. We do have coyotes is about as wild as we get. Yeah. And raccoons are vicious. So
I'm all for bringing bears and wolves back to the UK or whatever in the wildlands, because I know that bringing those back has been a topic of discussion over the last few years. Obviously, we have our high population densities, which are not exactly the way things used to be. And so with that comes this creative vulnerability. So we still have to create an urban ecology which is wild to an extent, but not too wild.
Dangerous.
Yeah, not dangerous. Not dangerous. That's right. It's something you got to think about. What trees are you planting? Are you all right? So we're going to turn this green space, which used to just be a big open patch of turf, like a sports field, and we're going to create a forest. It's okay, we probably shouldn't put in trees that are highly flammable. We probably shouldn't put in trees that are going to drop big, massive limbs now and then. You can do it in ways where you have a bit of a risk assessment and management, so that for a high population density where you've got thousands of people moving through that space, the odds of something bad happening to one person increase so much. So we do have to have some kind of risk assessment of what we are rewilding with, but that definitely doesn't mean we should keep the turf.
I did want to catch up with you on your research. What are you writing right now? Because I did earlier, since we last talked, you had a paper come out with some co-authors in the Restoration Ecology Journal. Can you give us a little taste of something else got your foot
so
in?
That article came out online in April, and I think it came out in print. I don't know if anyone even gets the print copy. Do people do that?
I wish I did. I don't know. I find it hard. My eyes, I don't know. Think of a natural selection, man. My eyes are just getting worse. I wear contacts.
The screen time's terrible, isn't it?
All right. This article, Revegetation of Urban Green Space, Rewild Soil Microbiotas with Implications for Human Health and Urban Design.
Yeah, that's the one. So that just came out in print today, I think. I got an email this morning.
Did it? Something came out today?
Well, that same article, but just in the print version.
Man, anyway. Look how I thought I was behind the times, because like back in April, I was like, oh, I should have got him back on the podcast right away to talk about it. But yeah, it's timely if it's coming out right now in paper.
I'm not that productive either.
And no pressure. I don't want to stress you out, and like
I think my supervisor probably gives me a bit more pressure. So yeah, that paper that came out online in April and in print today was just to look at different vegetation types within an urban area. So we had like lawn or like turf area, vacant lots, which is just, perhaps there's going to be a house built there one day, or a disused or unkept park where it's just like annual weeds over the ground. Just the traditional, like Victorian parkland with the turf and a few trees. And then there was some remnant sites for a native reference, and then the native revegetated woodland. So it was just comparing those revegetated woodlands where they've actually got these within the urban area, comparing the soil microbes, the archaea, the bacteria, the fungi, and the microeukaryotes, like the little worms and things, in those revegetated soils to those other more traditional urban green space types, and then the remnant reference. So it wasn't really experimental. We didn't go out and do the revegetation. The revegetation was done over 15, 20 years ago. So we just looked at the communities and found that, the revegetated green spaces, which were these open sclerophyll woodlands, grassy woodlands, so still quite usable. It's not like they're super dense and people can't use it for recreation. They're still very usable. Their soil microbiome, in terms of the community composition and structure, was so much more similar to the remnant reference than to the more traditional space. So that was good. That's kind of showing, okay, revegetation can introduce more wild type microbial communities to an urban space. We still don't know if that's good for health or not. That's still the hypothesis. But revegetation works in urban areas, which can have these weird soils that are just these conglomerates of bits and pieces from all over the place. So that was good to know. But then, looking at the genus level, because we just did a marker gene analysis, so it's not quite specific enough to be able to identify species, but we can identify genera with confidence. And so identifying some of the genera, we found that in the revegetated space, it looked like there was a lot more genera involved with nitrogen cycling and carbon cycling and stuff like that. Whereas genera that were much more prevalent in the sort of lawns and vacant lots, so these heavily degraded sites that get lots of inputs, fertilizer and pesticides and stuff, and mowed all the time, tended to have some pretty nasty pathogens for plants, for people, and other animals as well. So we didn't identify actual pathogens to the species, but we just identified that those genera are there and that the conditions are right for those genera. So perhaps those pathogens might do better in those types of green space. So that was an interesting finding as well, is that, over in the revegetated woodlands, we've got a more wild type soil microbiome, and over in the more traditional kind of Victorian era style green space, we have a very different soil microbiome that seems to be dominated and differentiated by potentially pathogenic genera. So, yeah, quite big differences between those different green spaces. So what I'm working on now, what I'll do a bit on this afternoon, is taking some soil samples also in China and the UK and New Delhi with the same sort of design, looking at those more native vegetation diversity versus that more manicured low-level vegetation diversity within urban areas, and looking at the differences in the soil bacteria. And I'm also working on a paper. I've got data looking at the skin microbiomes of children, looking at how short-term exposure to their schoolyard green space may influence their microbiota, but also their long-term. So kids that spend, say, while they're in class time, that spend, say, 10 hours a week outside, versus other kids that are in a different class who perhaps have a more conservative teacher or something that likes to spend a bit more time inside, that only go outside for 2 to 3 hours a week for class time. Is there a difference in the skin microbiota of those kids under those different regimes of, I guess, outside time ratio for the ratio of their outside time relative to their total class time? That data looks pretty interesting at the moment. Yeah, working on a project with Rhode Island School of Design. That's just pretty new. Just trying to look into, how do we actually create a functional urban green space that's beneficial for exposure, but functional for the community as well, for all the things that people like to do in an urban green space. And how can that be over time by non-scientists, by council members or school children and stuff like that? I feel like there's more. Oh, yeah. COVID's a funny thing. Like, I got funding.
Oh, yeah. I remember did you reach out? I remember there was a data set you were looking for a while back.
Yeah, looking at levels of sort of local government or county level biodiversity data versus COVID and asthma rates, stuff like that. But that's on the back burner at the moment. I had an interesting discussion with, I think she's an infectious disease ecologist in London. Yeah, that was really, this was when I was just trying to start this project that, about COVID rates and biodiversity. And she's just like explained the complexity that goes into studying infectious disease ecology, because just the so many variables, and from the ways we interact with biodiversity and our population density and all this stuff, and then what host species are around, what host species do well in an urban environment or don't do well, and then what's the climate doing and all this sort of stuff. And there's just so much to it.
Infinitely complex, right?
Yes.
All right. Well, yeah, you're keeping busy. I'm amazed.
I started a blog as well.
You definitely. Yes. Sorry, I was just about to mention that.
I just started a personal website, just as like a kind of a CV sort of thing. And I thought I'd add a blog just to kind of keep it interesting. And I was just going to write about science stuff. But then when I sat down to write, I thought, I'm not really interested in writing about too much science stuff because I do too much science in my life anyway. I would need something else. So I just started writing about other things that rattle around in my head. And I just found it to be so cathartic, actually, to write. I finally found a creative medium to express and organize my thoughts and just help me understand things, and then just put it on the internet. And if someone wants to read it, they can read it.
That's right. Just put it out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did talk about one thing, I think, in this latest post. I think you're talking about imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, I've definitely felt like an imposter in social situations. And, that's probably part introversion, part society telling us we need to be this perfect thing, and part, we don't show our bad side to society. So we've just got this veneer around us of all the people that we interact with of their best version. But we know that we're not our best version inside. And so we're really uncomfortable. We're like, but everyone else is doing amazing, and I just feel like things are going crazy and I'm just holding it together. But, you know, the realization that they're all feeling the same way probably, and just kind of putting their best foot out there. But yeah, like, God, you log on to science Twitter.
It's crazy how sometimes the algorithm on social media can just make you feel so bad.
Yeah.
Like it's somehow personalized for your own insecurities.
Yeah. But you log on to science Twitter and people are just so many people, and also not just on Twitter, but, you know, people, you know, in my building at uni, in the office space or whatever, friends there at uni, just in science, you know, it's just because science as a construct is one of the most perfectionist veneer that is out there. Who publishes a failed study? No one. Who talks about a failed grant application? No one. Like all the failures, which is like 95% of the job, just get swept under the rug, and all you see in the glistening publications are the successes. And so I think in science there's just imposter syndrome everywhere you look. Everyone just feels so inadequate and uncomfortable with where they are because, you know, on the one hand you've got science itself sort of only allowing the world to see the successes, even though that's just a small part of it. So it creates this kind of paradox or a dissonance of reality. And then, like, on the other hand, you've got the whole higher education system where you've got students in any other industry or profession would be called clients or just employees,
users.
And so we get these like postgraduate students to do this really complicated work that you would have to pay a consultant mega bucks to do for dirt cheap. So there are those who feel the imposter syndrome in science during postgrad studies because, oh, wow, science is this big, amazing thing that drives all this positive change in the world and da-da-da, and I'm not worthy. And then I hear some stories of some other people who are really confident through postgrad, and then it comes to getting a job afterwards, and they're like, holy shit, you know, when you get that postdoc position or something, and they're just like, I don't feel adequate to actually be a leader now, to have my own students. Because I think they've kind of internalized that being undervalued by the university by being paid so little to do such important work that when it's time to actually get paid with a job after postgrad studies, after you get your PhD or whatever, there's like this whole like, well, I don't belong up here in this sort of upper class. I think there's a lot of systemic structures in place that kind of keep this feeling of inadequacy across the general population going along, ticking over. But there's also an aspect of just like putting that aside and just sort of getting comfortable in yourself and saying, well, I am here and I am achieving things, and, you know, having some self-compassion and just like actually trying to get yourself through it. But, you know, and I spoke to my sister. I was like, oh, you know, have you heard about imposter syndrome? Do you ever get it? She's like, oh, that's like 60% of my job. I'm a lawyer and I'm in management. Like I'm in a male job.
Yeah.
She's like, I'm not supposed to be here.
That's right. And I don't know if I helped the situation or not. Just again, like another white thing of me is like, solve your problem, right? So I was like, here's a podcast you should listen to a while back.
No, that's good. I was asking for resources because that's when and I wrote that post because I didn't really understand the whole concept myself, because it is, I think, so complicated in the way that it manifests. Like, I think so many different avenues for it to manifest in different people. I remember we had a postdoc in our lab who was talking about how in science she was feeling like an imposter and she was very successful. And then I said afterwards to one of the other guys, like, oh, I haven't really felt that in science just yet. And he was almost incredulous with me that, you know, how dare you say that you haven't felt it? Like, everyone feels it. And it's like, I mean, I've felt it socially, absolutely, like, you know, with all the beautiful people and Hollywood and magazines telling us how we're supposed to be. But yeah, I hadn't felt it in science. But sometimes I do. But yeah, it's just interesting how it manifests from different avenues in different people's lives, but it's
and if
there.
it's fleeting, sometimes it's very fleeting, and sometimes it sticks around for a while. I don't know if no one's immune to it, but I do see this, the good and bad of Twitter and science Twitter. I think it can be therapeutic in some ways, where you see, like some shit go down, but then too, some people like really rise up and support each other at the same time. These little
some very
communities,
supportive stuff.
Communities of people particularly, and very different, but like kind of the LGBTQ community. Sometimes like people can find connection that way if they're really kind of feeling like shitty and ostracized in the physical space where they are. Hopefully you're finding some solace, but I don't know, you are Virgo, so I have some perspective on it now. I feel like I understand you a little bit more.
I like to overthink and complicate things. Absolutely. But I don't know. I think it just manifests for so many different people because the social world that we see is just so fake, and we're trying to live up to this fake. So I guess that's where I was trying to get to in that blog post, was that the true imposter is society. That's the true fraud. That's the real fake that's out there. But it kind of gaslights us and manipulates us to think that we are the fakes when we're not. It's the structures that only want to see success and beauty, or prescriptions of beauty anyway.
Right. Now, that term you use, gaslighting, I think is very important. I think it cuts through really what you're talking about in some ways, that the realities are sort of contrived or imposed upon you, or that you think you're navigating through these weird structures that are socially constructed over time, and they're distorted by the reality, the personalized weird realities that we see on social media. I think it speaks to the value of disconnecting, like it seems like you're planning on doing sometimes, and just kind of getting introspective can help, and kind of searching within and trying to find peace within. I know that seems kind of cliche, but
absolutely.
Sometimes,
and that peace within, but also just not allowing any one thing in our life to be too important. To stay grounded, that, like I'm doing this science right at this point of time in my life, but, it's not my life and it's not my identity. And I think that helps me manage that imposter syndrome, because I'm not trying to get onto a pedestal. The scientific community creates this fake pedestals that we sort of need to strive to be on. But when you walk up to them and touch them, your hand just goes straight through, because it's just it's a mirage or an illusion. But if we keep trying to get on top of these illusions, then we're just never going to feel good about ourselves. So just try not to take it too seriously. And this is just one little part of my life that I'm doing at the moment, and it's interesting, and until it's not, and then I'll do something else.
Mm-hmm. So you're very aware, where you're at.
Yeah.
Not holding on too tight.
Yeah.
Trying to anyway. Not white knuckling the scientific career.
Not at all.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks for your time. I'll let you get on with your morning. It's good to talk with you. Yeah, that was a good meandering, scriptless conversation. I was glad.
Yeah,
I was able to listen. See
I love
what
the long
you're
form.
up to. See the long hair. Love it.
Yeah.
It's looking good.
It's getting there. I think I need to get it. I am rewilding.
Rewilding your hair.
My good friend Colette, every time she sees me, she's like, "You wild man," in a Scottish accent. "You wild man." Because I've just got my hair, just when it's dry, it's just out everywhere. So I am rewilding in every sense. I'm growing my hair long and living in a 3-walled shed.
Out in the middle of the desert. It's good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Good times. Good chat.
Right. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks. Talk to you soon.
Adios.
Bye-bye. That's it for the reunion interview with Jacob Mills. So I would encourage you all to go back and take a look at the Microbiome Rewilding Hypothesis paper. I'll put a link to that in the show notes and show description. You can also find out more about him and his endeavors at his new website. Then on Twitter, at @MicroRewilding. Even though I gave some thank yous at the top of this show, I want to take some time now to give my gratitude for all the guests during this past year plus of the Tree Hugger experience, as well as some other folks who were kind of behind the scenes. I'll mention again Sean McManus, who I haven't seen for like 9 months because he's on deep quarantine, podcasting, and writing a gardening book. Alana Jacobs for developing the Tree Hugger podcast artwork. What she created embodies the essence of my favorite tree at sunrise, the Pacific Madrone. Check out her work at alana.nj on Instagram. Jesse Bond from the band Dumb Thumbs, who have provided the music in the wild. You can find their music at bandcamp.com. Janine Krause, a Tacoma naturopath who had me on her show The Health Fix late last year to discuss environmental exposure to microbes. Check out the Tree Hugger website to listen to that podcast. Dr. Kathy Wolf, South Sound homegirl and our mentor on everything urban nature. Brianne Palmer, who gave us 2 episodes on biocrust and optimism. Congratulations on getting married. Julia Plevin for his bathing guide. Congratulations on your engagement and living the life you deserve. Sabine Bailey for opening up our eyes to the underwater wonder of coral reef restoration. Tim Christofferson from the United Nations. Muchas gracias for giving us a peek under the hood of the restoration decade. And stay tuned for a soft opening episode to the decade in late 2020. Bethany Walder, big boss of the Society for Ecological Restoration. She is making moves on the worldwide restoration policy front and supporting all our members around the world. Dr. Sally Aiken for satiating my questions about forest adaptation to climate change. Travis Longcore, who is a doctor too, shed some light on the increasing levels of light pollution that we are facing and its effects on our ecosystems. Actually, I am attending the International Dark Sky Association virtual conference next weekend as well, so this thing is really on my mind. Thanks to Doug Parsons from America Adapts, who had me on his Simpatico Climate Adaptation channel to discuss urban forest restoration. That video of our conversation is on the Tree Hugger website as well. Sarah Lowe for talking to us about care of urban trees and each other as we were on the precipice of the coronavirus lockdown. Viva la Tacoma Tree Foundation. Sean Rowe from the Resident Restoration Podcast and the Eco Restoration Network of Storytellers. Matthew Agai, restoration veteran, growing his fleet of tree planting drones, reforesting the toughest sites in the world post-wildfire. Professor Karen Hull from UC Santa Cruz, who primed us on ecological restoration and continues to school us on the nuances of tree planting campaigns that endeavor to combat climate change worldwide. John Marsleff, who invited us to his home to spy on pileated woodpeckers and snags. Vivek Chandas, who recently came on the show and talked to us about the origins of urban heat islands and their impacts on urban ecosystems. Judith Shapiro and Ife Lee, who also just recently were on the show after writing their book, China Goes Green. That show was really cool because I got to talk about international relations and demystifying China because there's so much good news and conflicting news coming out of that country. Maya Van Rossum, who enlightened us on what we should do to win a right to a healthy environment. For all those guests, I am indebted to them forever. I think we put a good set of interviews together in the past year. I would love it if you listen to all the shows. I love it too if you have just listened to like one show because it appeals to you. It's been good times. I look forward to serving you more in the future. And next up, Shanna Lee Hirsch will orient us on the socio-technical of science as people attempt to restore the lands, waters, and salmon of the Columbia River Basin. Imagine a watershed the size of France. Shanna recently wrote a book meant for us restorationists. It is called Anticipating Future Environments, about climate change in and adaptive restoration of the Columbia River. Here's a little peek.
So I just think it's really fascinating and a huge challenge. Our idea of like what is possible and what we want the future to be has such strength in the way that we act in the world, the way that, be it, doing science, environmental management, ideas of what we want our nation to be or whatever. All of these things, although they're like intangible and imaginaries and ideas, they actually have material impact on the world because that is how we go about acting in the world. So I am really interested in imaginaries, and that's what a lot of my work is focused on now.
Thanks for joining me again for another episode of Tree Hugger Podcast. I'm Michael Yadrick. Please check the show description for information about Jacob Mills. Find us online at treehuggerpod.com and social media at treehuggerpod. Subscribe, rate, and review the show, please, on whichever podcast platform you enjoy listening to. That was the sounds of DJ Williams again. I found his music on the YouTube audio library. Thanks for hanging out for the past year with me. See you in the woods. Woods.